Let's dive right into this explainer, because today we're unpacking a truly wild paradox. On one hand, you've got this ancient royalty, divine right, and a literal centuries-old claim to the British throne. But on the other hand, we're talking about modern, heavily regulated, API-driven capital management. And the crazy thing is, both of these seemingly opposite worlds crash together in one tiny European nation. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start by looking at this Alpine financial powerhouse, trace that fascinating Jacobite royal lineage, and then break down the concept of the sovereign trust. From there, we'll explore this really interesting American Jacobite narrative that's popped up around it all, and finally look at the actual modern fintech reality of how this operates today. Section 1. The Alpine financial powerhouse. Okay, so before we talk about global finance, you really have to understand the physical reality of this place. Liechtenstein is a true microstate. It covers just 160 square kilometers. To put that into perspective, you could drive across the whole thing in under an hour. It's sandwiched right there between Switzerland and Austria, with a population of just 38,000 people. Honestly, the borders are so open that in the past, Swiss soldiers have accidentally marched into the country during bad weather, and nobody even noticed until an official apology was sent. So yeah, physically, it is incredibly small. But you have to contrast that tiny physical footprint with this absolutely staggering number. The personal wealth of the ruling family is estimated at around $5 to $6 billion. That makes the House of Liechtenstein legally the wealthiest sovereign family in the entire European Union. And the key takeaway here is that unlike the British monarchy, where most assets are tied up in the state-controlled crown estate, this is their own personal property. The lion's share of this wealth is anchored by their privately owned bank, the LGT Group. Now, unlike a lot of European monarchs who basically just hold ceremonial roles these days, the Prince of Liechtenstein actually wields immense constitutional power. The country uniquely combines a parliamentary democracy with a politically active monarch who can literally veto parliamentary bills and adopt laws. And this power is driven by a very specific philosophy, the concept of a non-expansionist crown. Instead of getting tangled up in outward political drama or relying on debt-fueled government expansion, the crown focuses almost entirely on internal economic stability and absolute wealth preservation. Section 2. The Jacobite royal lineage. So this modern financial powerhouse is actually deeply tied to ancient British history. The House of Liechtenstein doesn't just hold local power, they hold a historical claim that stretches right across the English Channel. If we trace the Jacobite succession, we have to rewind all the way back to the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when the Catholic King James II was deposed by the British Parliament. His supporters, the Jacobites, believed in the divine right of kings and hereditary succession. They totally rejected Parliament's right to mess with the inheritance. Since the direct Stuart line eventually died out, this claim bounced through a few European noble houses, Savoy, Austria-Est, the House of Wilsbach. And today, through his mother, that ancient claim rests squarely with the modern House of Liechtenstein. Which brings us to this guy, Prince Joseph Wenzel. Born in London in 1995, he's currently second in line to the Liechtenstein throne and third in line to that Jacobite succession. When he eventually ascends, he'll actually be the first potential Jacobite heir born in the British Isles since 1688. But he's also a thoroughly modern millennial. He graduated from Sandhurst, and get this, he even spent time interning in the United States Senate. That background is absolutely crucial. His lineage isn't just some historical trivia. It uniquely positions him as this culturally fluent, strategic partner for U.S. finance. He effortlessly bridges that old-world sovereignty with modern American capital. Section 3. The sovereign trust concept. Now, to really understand how this historical lineage intersects with billions of dollars, we have to look at Liechtenstein's unique legal architecture. This is where history literally meets capital. Nearly a century ago, Liechtenstein became the very first continental European country to adopt the concept of trusts. They basically built this highly versatile, custom-made solution for global wealth management. And the kicker? There's no rule against perpetuities. That means there's no arbitrary legal expiration date on these trusts, so wealth can be shielded, managed, and grown indefinitely, generation after generation. It's an incredibly robust framework. It blends the best parts of Austrian and Swiss law to offer maximum flexibility for structuring assets. It allows for pure purpose and charitable trusts, safeguards privacy, and heavily shields wealth from external claims. Plus, to ensure complete objectivity and keep international investors feeling confident, Liechtenstein has a long-standing tradition of appointing foreign judges from Switzerland and Austria to serve on its highest courts. Pretty smart, right? Section 4. The American Jacobite narrative. So, when you take this unique concentration of monarchical power, massive wealth, and flexible trust law, it's birthed this fascinating ideological narrative, particularly over in the United States. Within certain populist and traditionalist circles, you have this American Jacobite ideology emerging. These folks are highly critical of modern debt-based fiat monetary systems and centralized banking. When they look at Liechtenstein, they romantically view the reigning prince not just as a head of state, but as a literal sovereign trustee. They're drawn to this idea of the non-expansionist crown, a monarchy that doesn't rely on debt or inflation to fund endless government bloat, but instead acts as an absolute, unshakable fortress for private property rights. You'll often see these populist traditionalists point to modern rulings, like the 2019 Tayshieb's case, where the European Court of Justice said a member state could automatically strip someone of their EU citizenship just for living abroad too long, as proof that modern administrative states treat basic rights as fragile and conditional. And they contrast that conditional reality with Liechtenstein's sovereign trust model. To them, Liechtenstein represents absolute, immutable property rights, deeply rooted in divine right and unalterable succession. Section 5. The modern fintech reality. But let's look at how all this actually plays out in the real world of the global economy today. Because honestly, that romantic vision doesn't entirely match the boardroom reality. The ideological myth likes to paint Liechtenstein as this unregulated, opaque offshore sanctuary that just ignores international rules. But the truth is entirely different and, frankly, a bit ironic. The principality's actual regulatory strategy is strictly defined by international compliance. They are deeply integrated with the European Economic Area, they rigidly follow OECD guidelines, and they heavily prioritize transparency. So the supposed rebel sanctuary is actually incredibly compliant. Modern wealth management for these sovereign entities doesn't happen with quill and ink and a stone castle. Today, it requires highly sophisticated, compliant digital infrastructure. If we look at modern financial API documentation, a traditional general ledger is now managed via a journal entries API. Partner equity, handled through a capital accounts API. Everything has to be trackable, transparent, and instantly reportable using modern financial reporting APIs. Managing global capital alongside U.S. finance today involves very precise, automated digital steps. You're creating firm admin entities, you're automating journal entries in bulk, you're issuing digital capital calls to limited partners, and generating real-time, compliance-ready financial reports. This is the nuts and bolts operational reality of managing billions in private wealth today. Ultimately, Liechtenstein's true strength isn't about hiding wealth in the shadows. It's about brilliant adaptation. They took a traditional civil law trust framework from a century ago and seamlessly plugged it into the heavily regulated digital economy. They've adopted frameworks like MiCA for digital assets and strict anti-money laundering laws. They've basically combined the stability of a non-expansionist crown with the agility of a tech startup. And with a future leader like Prince Wenzel, who completely understands both his Jacobite heritage and the complex realities of U.S. financial corridors, Liechtenstein is positioned as an incredibly strategic partner for global capital. Which leaves us with a really fascinating paradox to think about. You have Prince Joseph Wenzel, a millennial heir with a centuries-old claim to the British throne, preparing to rule a nation that relies on cutting-edge APIs to manage its wealth. So what do you think? Does the true power of sovereignty today lie in the romance of ancient royal bloodlines, or does it sit squarely in the digital infrastructure and compliance frameworks managing the capital? It's definitely something to chew on as the past and the future continue to collide in this tiny alpine state. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning how the systems around us really work.